Hi, good day everyone. Today we're going to discuss about global citizenship. I'll start off with by sharing my screen with you guys. Okay, so first we start off with definitions of global citizenship and of course the common characteristics of global citizenship. Okay, so citizenship or global citizens usually have an impact on ending extreme poverty through some of the actions that they take. The effects of small actions are not always obvious, but by working together, specific intangible outcomes are usually achieved. So global citizens' voices influence world leaders and decision makers and usually contribute to shaping our world. So being a global citizen does not mean that you have to give up other citizenship identities such as that of ours as Filipinos. You already have, example, your citizenship, your allegiance to your local community, religious or other ethnic groups. By being a global citizen, it just means that you have another layer of identity with the planet and as a whole, added on to who you are. And if you take that identity seriously, there are a new set of rights and responsibilities that come with it. So here are the characteristics of global citizenship. Usually, citizenship is defined as the status of a person recognized under a custom or law or a sovereign state or any other nation or with jurisdiction as a member or of belonging to a state. And this each state usually is free to determine the conditions which it will recognize your powers as, of course, citizens. So under the conditions which that status will be withdrawn if you, of course, violated some of those laws. So recognition by a state as a citizen generally carries on with recognition of civil, of course, political and social rights, which are not afforded to any other aliens or non-citizens. So in general, the basic rights normally got regarded as arising from citizenship are, of course, the right to a passport, the right to leave and return to your country or countries if of citizenship, and of course, the right to live in that country and to, of course, work there. So some of the countries permit their citizens to, of course, have multiple citizenships, while others insist on exclusive allegiance. So a person who does not have citizenship, usually of any state, is said to be stateless, while one who lives on state borders, whose territorial status is uncertain, is a borderlander. While the general definition of citizenship is membership in a political society or group, citizens as a concept is difficult to define. So thinkers as far back as Aristotle realized that there was no agreed upon definition of citizenship. And modern thinkers as well as agree that the history of citizenship is complex and with no single definition predominating it. So it is hard to isolate what citizenship means without any reference to other terms such as, of course, nationalism, civil society, and of course, democracy. And according to one view of citizenship by Leary, it is usually a subject of study and is undergoing transformation. Of course, with increased interest in the meaning of the term, which continues to shift. So there is usually an agreement that citizenship is culture specific and it is a function of each, of course, political culture. Further, citizenship is usually seen and understood depending on the viewpoint of the person making the determination. So of course, such that person from either an upper class background will have a different notion of citizenship than a person from, of course, a lower class citizen. So one view is that the citizenship is should be studied as a long and direct progression throughout Western and of course throughout Western civilization, usually from the beginning of ancient Greece or perhaps earlier. So it extends usually to the present. For example, the thinkers like Felix Gross examine the citizenship as usually the history of the continuation of a single institution. Other views question whether citizenship can be examined as a linear process growing over time. Felix Gross examines citizenship as the history of the continuation of a single institution. Other views question whether citizenship can be examined, usually as a linear process, growing over time and usually for the better, and see that progression approach as an oversimplification, possibly leading to incorrect conclusions. So according to this view, citizenship should not be considered as progressive realization of the core meanings that are usually built into the citizenship definition. Another caveat offered by other thinkers is to avoid judging citizenship from one era in terms of the standard of another era. According to this view, citizenship should be understood by examining it within the context of a city state or nation and usually trying to understand it as a people from these societies understood it. So the rest of citizenship has usually been studied as an aspect of the developmental law. And according to, of course, Leary, by voting, citizens are participating in usually the democratic process. Citizens vote for their leaders to represent them and their ideas, and the leaders support their citizens' interests. So according to Beiner, on his writing about classical civic humanist conception, citizenship is an active process of deliberation, collective action and responsibility, and not a passive one. And of course, the beneficiaries are services and policies. So human beings are always, of course, they form communities. And this is the idea of one's identity that transcends geography or political borders, and that responsibilities or rights are usually derived from membership in a broader class. So humanity, this does not mean that such a person denounces or weaves its right to other moral local identities. But these identities are given usually second places to their membership in the global community. So the idea leads to questions about the state of global society in the age of globalization. The author, as mentioned here, Ronald Israel, points to a crucially needed and important trend toward global citizenship, which usually, he says, can take many forms at a collective conceptual worldview, systemic and structural, and usually institutional levels. So he believes that individual beliefs, values, and actions and efforts are synergistic, summating usually can and they're making a real difference. That's usually what he describes as being a human being. So global citizenship is a way of living that recognizes our world is increasingly a complex web of connections and usually interdependencies. So one in which our choices and actions may have repercussions for people and communities locally, nationally, or internationally. So there are shared values and usually build governance and structures according to Israel. So next slide. Usually in the broad sense of the term, global citizenship or world citizenship, as described by the authors, typically defines a person who places their identity with the global community. So above their identity as a citizen of a particular nation or place. So this idea is that identity transcends geography or usually political borders, and that the planetary human community is interdependent and whole. So humankind is essentially one, and the terms has been used in, of course, education, political philosophy, and has enjoyed popular use in social movements such as, of course, the World Citizen Movement and, of course, the Mondialization Movement. A global citizen is someone who identifies with being part of an emerging global community and whose actions contribute to building this community's values and practices. So the common characteristics of the definitions that were described a while ago is, of course, there is a complexity and an interdependency. There is a global dimension in global citizenship. You are developing identities or global identities. And of course, community building is one facet of that because it describes that you are one or being a humankind. And of course, you contribute to building communities, values, and practices once you, of course, reside in that area and you commune with each one. And of course, you build governance structures and of course, building a sustainable values-based world community. That's how being a global citizenship. These are the characteristics. So the responsibilities of a global community usually include the following. So we have their responsibility to understand one's own perspective and of course the perspectives of others in global issues. So almost everyone has a global issue or economic perspective attached to it. So the responsibility of this citizen or as a global citizen is to understand these different perspectives and promote problem solving or consensus among the different perspectives, and of course, building of a common ground solutions. So a global citizen, again, should avoid taking sides with one particular point of view and instead search for ways to bring all sides together. And of course, second, responsibility to respect the principle of cultural diversity. So it means cultural diversity is the multiple perspectives that exist with most global issues and often are a reflection of course, each difference in the cultural belief systems of each nation. So each of our major cultural belief systems usually brings value added to our search for solutions to global issues that usually we face in daily lives. Okay, in building a sustainable values-based world community, it is important to maintain respect for the world's different cultural traditions and to make an effort to bring together these world leaders and of course these different cultural traditions who often have a common place with each other, and of course to help these leaders to bring the best elements of the specific cultures to the task of solving global issues and of course building world communities. The third is making connections and build relationships with people from other countries and of course other countries and culture. So global citizens need to reach out and build relationships with people from other countries as cultures. And others, we will continue to live in isolated communities with narrow conflict-prone points of view on global issues. So it is quite easy to build global relationships. And most countries, cities, and towns are now populated with immigrants and people from different ethnic traditions. And of course, the internet offers a wide range of opportunities to connect with these people on different issues. So even without traveling abroad, which is of course a useful thing to do, and even now this pandemic, it is possible to build a network of personal and group cross-country and cultural relationships. And building such networks helps these people or us to understand or to be involved better in understanding the differences of each other. And of course, finding a common solution to the global issues that everyone faces. And the fourth, responsibility to understand the ways in which people and countries of the world are interconnected and usually interdependent. So global citizens have a responsibility to understand the many ways in which their lives are interconnected. Of course, these are with people in countries in different parts of the world. And for example, they need to understand the ways in which the global environment affects them, where they live, and how the environmental lifestyles they choose affect the environment in other parts of the world. So that usually they need to understand the ways in which human rights violations in foreign countries affects their own human rights. And of course, how growing income inequalities across the world affect the quality of their lives and how these issues or global tide of immigration affects what goes on in their countries. Of course, number five is the responsibility to understand the global issues. So global citizens, we have the responsibility to understand the major global issues that affect their lives. For example, they need to understand the impact of the scarcity of resources on societies, the challenges presented by the current distribution of course, wealth and power, and the roots of conflict and dimensions of, again, peace building. These challenges posed by a growing, of course, global population. Number six, of course, is responsibility to advocate for greater international cooperation with other nations. So global citizens need to pay to be an activist role or to play an activist role in urging greater international cooperation between their nation and others. So when usually global issue arises, it is important for global citizens to provide advice on how their countries can work with other nations to address a common issue, how it can work with established international organizations like, of course, the UN, and rather than proceed on a unilateral course of action. And of course, number seven is responsibility for advocating the implementation of international agreements, conventions, treaties related to global issues. So global citizens have, of course, a responsibility to, of course, advocate for having their countries ratify and implement global agreements, usually conventions and treaties that they have signed. So implementation is, of course, very important. Responsibility, number eight, is responsibility for advocating for more effective equality or global equality and justice in each of the value domains of the world community. There are, of course, a growing number of cross-sector issues that require the implementation of global standards of justice and equity. For example, the global rise in military spending, the unequal access by different countries to technology, like what we are experiencing, and of course, lack of consistent national policies on immigration. Global citizens have a responsibility to work with one another and advocate for global equality and justice and find solutions to these specific issues. Okay, so ang dami po nating responsibilities, right? If you are a global citizen. So if you are an active citizen, you have, of course, this global governance. So we have discussed global governance before, and usually we have a representative form of democracy. Okay, so representative democracy is a form of democracy in which people vote for representatives who then vote on policy initiatives for representatives who then vote on policy initiatives as opposed to a direct democracy or a form of democracy in which people vote on policy initiatives directly. Okay? So, yan po yung ibig sabihin po ng representative democracy. So the United Nations is considered to be the only international organization that was with universal membership. So which means that all internationally recognized states and individual observers, such as, of course, the Vatican, Palestine, participate in its work. So the UN member states cooperate in, of course, all the fields of international law, global security, economic and sustainable development, and other issues such as social equity. So again, remember, the United Nations was formed on October 24, 1945 at the founding conference held in, of course, San Francisco. And then, of course, there are 51 countries participated at that conference. So it is worth pointing out that among them was, again, Yugoslavia, bearing in mind that the status of the founding member has a prestigious meaning. So there are now, as in presently, of course, 193 or 92 UN member states. From its headquarters in New York, these UN member states and its specialized agencies manage, usually, and decide on administrative issues at regular meetings, which we have observed previously or last month in a UN General Assembly. So it is held each year. So in addition to its headquarters in New York, the UN usually has three main offices in Geneva, Nairobi, and Vienna. So the office of the United Nations in Geneva is the European United Nations headquarters. So it is located in the building of course, the Palace of Nations, and it's built for the needs of the League of Nations between 1929 and 1938 in Geneva, Switzerland, right? So how usually decisions are made by the United Nations? There is usually an annual general meeting, and of course, it opens every year on the third Tuesday of September, and usually lasts for 1 year. So the work usually of the GA, the General Assembly, consists of a round of debates, negotiation, and lobbying, and of course, decision making, implementation, and reporting. So simulations of these of the work of the UN bodies and of course the UN conferences focus on the first three phases of the cycle. And usually there are different components on this decision-making process of each participant that needs to understand them. So those are debating, negotiating, and undertaking action. Therefore, we need to provide a clear overview of these three components and highlight what is the most important aspect. Okay, so the General Assembly is, of course, there is the Plenary Assembly with 6 main committees, and we've already described this. And the General Assembly discusses, of course, the item and it adopts one or more resolutions on that point. So the ECOSOC, I think we have described this already, coordinates with the work of the 14 UN specialized agencies and, of course, the commissions below them. So each receives reports from these 9 UN funds and programs, and of course the issues and policies that of the UN system and to the member states. Okay, so the ECOSOC Council, usually is the civil society platform, extends over 70% of human and financial resources of the entire UN system. So the council actually, there are 54 member governments are elected by the General Assembly for 3-year terms, and of course carrying out its mandate, the ECOSOC or the Economic and Social Council consults with, of course, the academics, the business sector representatives, and usually more than 2,500 non-governmental organizations. So it's registered and non-governmental organizations. So that's the process of the decision making usually of the United Nations. So also there is a corporate sustainability aspect in, of course, describing the Economic and Social Council department. And it starts with the company's value system. And it's, of course, it's a principle-based approach to doing business. Okay? That's why it's called corporate social responsibility. This means the company is operating in ways that are at the minimum. You meet the fundamental responsibilities in the areas of human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. And responsible businesses enact the same values and principles wherever they have a presence and know that good practices in one area do not really offset or harm in another. So by incorporating the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact into strategies, policies, and procedures, and of course, establishing a culture of integrity. And companies are not only upholding their basic responsibilities to people and the planet, but also setting the stage for a long-term success. So of course, human rights is very important to the United Nations. And of course, the first principle of the human rights is, businesses should support and respect the protection of internationally proclaimed human rights. And principle number 2, make sure that they are not complicit in human rights abuses. So these are for corporate businesses. And of course, labor is very important. For principle number 3, businesses should uphold the freedom of association and the effective recognition of the rights to collective bargaining. So principle number 4, there should be the elimination of all forms of forced and compulsory labor. Number 5 is, of course, the effective abolition of child labor, and of course, the elimination. Number 6 is the elimination of the discrimination in respect of employment and occupation. So for the environment, we have also some principles for the global impact or the governance. Number 7, businesses should support a precautionary approach to environmental challenges. And of course, principle number 8 is you undertake initiatives to promote greater environmental responsibility. And principle number 9 is you encourage the development and diffusion of environmentally friendly technologies. And of course, anti-corruption, the principle is businesses should work against corruption in all its forms, including extortion and bribery. Okay? So the global citizenship usually has has this the following. Okay? So when you mention global citizenship, it pervades all over migration, climate change, climate policy, sustainable development. And there is an emerging world community to which we all belong. And there's an urgent need for, of course, citizen leaders who can play active roles in forming world communities. So such activism can take many forms, including advocating at the local and global level for policy and programmatic solutions and address the global problems, participating in decision-making processes of global governance organizations, and of course, adopting and promoting changes in behavior that help protect the Earth's environment, contributing to worldwide humanitarian reliefs, and of course, organizing events and celebrate the diversity in world, music and art, culture, and spiritual traditions. So, in an emerging world, most of us feel a connection to others around the world facing similar challenges to ourselves. And yet, we lack, of course, adequate tools and resources and support to act on this emotion. So, our ways of thinking and being are still colored by trapping the old allegiances and ways of seeing things that are no longer valid. Nonetheless, there is a longing to pull back the veil that keeps us from clearly seeing the world as a whole, and of course, finding more sustainable ways to connect with those who share our common humanity. Okay, so remember that we are not alone, and the emerging world community is to which we all belong. So again, I hope you learned something from global citizenship. And this is first of a series. So I hope that now you understand the complexities of being or living in a contemporary world. So the next few discussions after this discussion, the next meeting is I'm going to ask you questions with regards to global citizenship. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for listening. Bye.